Hi, everybody. So this is going to be chapter 6, part 2. I don't expect to finish the rest of this PowerPoint in this video, so that means there will be a part 3 for chapter 6 and the very intriguing integumentary system. So let's get on with this. All right, last time we introduced the dermis. Remember that there are 2 layers to the dermis. We have a papillary layer, which is the superficial parts of the dermis, and we have a reticular layer, which is the deeper part of the dermis. Don't forget the tissue types that we find in each, and actually, we're just going to detail out these 2 layers right now. So the papillary layer, this is the more superficial layer of the dermis. Remember, it is made of areolar connective tissue. So of course, you're going to find all 3 fiber types there. You will find the very important collagen. You'll find reticular and elastic fibers. So there's a variety of functions to this particular part of the papillary layer. It helps provide strength. There is some networking and compartmentalizing going on. And then, of course, there's an elasticity that you find in this papillary layer. All right, so we have what are called dermal papillae. And let me just go back and show you what the dermal papillae are. Okay, so if you look here at this dermis, notice that the dermis looks like it's sort of protruding up into the epidermis. All right, that's why we have this sort of like wavy sort of appearance here between the epidermis and the dermis. It's due to the projections of the papillary dermis up into the epidermis, okay? And so these little regions, these like projections upwards of the dermis, these are called papillae. All right, so in these papillae, you find a lot of capillaries. You find your free nerve endings. Now, free nerve endings we'll mention again. Basically, free nerve endings are sensory neurons that are capable of detecting a variety of sensations. Because the ending of this particular kind of neuron is not specific. So it's called free. It's a free nerve ending. So that means it's going to be able to pick up different kinds of sensations. All right. It can pick up pretty much any sensation, touch, vibration, temperature. But do note that the free nerve ending is really best at picking up pain. Okay. So as far as pain sensation, really is highly associated with these free nerve endings. You also find other kinds of sensory receptors in this dermal papillae. Specifically, and this is in bold, so it is one you need to know. You'll need to know this for lab as well. A specific kind of touch receptor that we find in the dermal papillae are the Meissner's corpuscles. So you should know that these Meissner's corpuscles, they do have a specific modality that they sense, all right? These sensory receptors pick up superficial touch, all right? Whenever you see the word tactile, that means touch. So, and keep in mind, we're talking about the superficial layer of the dermis, right? The papillary layer is the superficial layer of the dermis. So yeah, Meissner's corpuscles are going to detect superficial touch, all right? So that means basically if you just touch the skin very lightly, okay, very light touch, superficial or light touch, these sensory receptors are sensitive to that specifically. So the deeper layer of the dermis is the reticular layer, and this is really most of it. Okay, and this is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. So you know it's dense with collagen. It's loaded up with collagen, Now we do see some elastic fibers down there, okay, but what's real important is the collagen, okay, that's really what's most abundant, and you know that this is responsible for strength. And due to the arrangement of those fibers, we have a resiliency and a flexibility possible there. Now, we're going to mention collagen a little bit more here as far as the dermis, all right? So the collagen here in the dermis, collagen also helps to bind water, all right? So we're able to keep an aqueous environment in the dermis because we really have a lot going on there. There's a lot of physiology happening in the dermis. There's so much structure and there's so many things happening there. So we do need to keep a lot of water there. Now remember, that water is not going to be able to exit the skin, is it? Hopefully you all remember why we will not have a loss of this water. All right, collagen will hold on to this water, and the water won't be able to leave anyway because we have our stratum granulosum in the epidermis, which is water resistant. That's a lipid layer, so the water cannot go through that layer. All right, so yeah, collagen is important for a lot of reasons in the dermis, not just for strength and resiliency, okay, but for a lot of reasons. And this is another one of those reasons because collagen binds water, so it helps maintain this aqueous environment in the dermis, all right, so that we can perform a lot of physiology there in the dermis. What else do we find in the reticular layer? We find what's known as the cutaneous plexus. Cutaneous meaning skin. Plexus, this word means a network of something. We're usually talking about a collection or a network of vessels, all right? So we do find a lot of our blood vessels there in the reticular layer. There is, we mentioned the Meissner's corpuscle that you find in the papillary dermis. There is another kind of sensory receptor located in the reticular layer, and this is called the Pacinian corpuscle. So this receptor is sensitive specifically to deep touch. Okay, so this receptor is activated when you, for example, have more pressure on the skin, a deeper touch. All right, so if you like press on the skin harder, then you will activate these Pacinian corpuscles. So these are sensitive to deep touch. That makes sense because Pacinian corpuscle is in the deep layer. All right, so just a little clinical here. Stretch marks. You've all heard of stretch marks. Well, stretch marks, that you should know that the clinical term for these is striae. Striae is really the formal term for these stretch marks. And so how do these stretch marks or these striae, how are they caused? Well, it's when we have tearing of collagen. We have tearing of collagen in the dermis, this causes these striae to appear. And of course, this is going to happen as a result of either obesity, all right, so basically stretching of the skin, okay, when you have any kind of stretching of the skin, such as in if you gain weight, all right, and pregnancy, for example, obviously anyone who has been pregnant knows all about these, right? So that's really the cause of these striae, is that we're having a tearing of the collagen due to an extreme stretching of the skin. Blisters, you should definitely know what a blister is, all right? So a blister is when you have a separation between the epidermis and the dermis. Okay. Now, there are a wide variety of causes to blisters. Mostly, I mean, you can have burns that can cause blisters. You can have like a abrasion, right? If you use a certain area too often, over and over, you can get a blister. All right. Blisters can also be the result of certain bacterial infections, but we usually don't really we call them by other names if it's caused by bacteria usually. But anyway, it's basically a similar deal. Blisters, what are they? They're going to be fluid-filled pockets. All right, we get these little accumulations of fluid Now, if we're talking about a blister that's due to like overuse of certain part area of the skin, usually it's water. It's just water filled. All right. If we're talking about a bacteria or something that's going to cause this fluid-filled pocket, it's usually going to be some sort of inflammatory fluid that fills that little pocket. All right. But in any event, blisters, you should basically know, where they are and what it really is. All right. It's going to be a fluid-filled pocket that you see existing between the epidermis and the dermis. All right, so this causes the epidermis to sort of elevate out, right, because we have this pocket filled with fluid. So it's a separation between the epidermis and dermis. And usually, these are short term, they go away. Here's the picture, and everybody pretty much knows what striae look like. This is a pretty serious case of striae. Okay. Again, extreme stretching of the skin due to tearing of collagen. Collagen fibers will tear due to extreme stretching. All right, so what about the hypodermis? The hypodermis is really not part of the skin. It's associated with it. It's deep to the dermis. It's composed of adipose. And, we also can refer to this as subcutaneous fat. You've all heard the term subcutaneous injections. So this is often the site of drug injections, and really it's because we have so much vascularity there. All right, we have a lot of blood vessels there. You're more likely to get that drug to the main bloodstream if you can get it to the hypodermis, right? All right. So, and you remember the functions of fat. All right. So same here with the hypodermis. All right. We're going to have an energy reservoir here because we store triglycerides in our adipocytes that make up the adipose. So if we need energy, then if we don't have carbohydrate and protein derived energy, then we will break down those triglycerides in the adipocytes and use that for energy. And also, insulation. All right. So just out of curiosity, subcutaneous fat is thicker in women. All right, and that's for child reasons. And thinner in infants and the elderly. And again, in elderly, everything pretty much is going to thin out or decrease. A reminder of the picture here of the skin and all the structures that we're going to learn that we are learning about, right? So skin color. So let's talk a little bit about what causes skin color, what gives the skin its color. The most important pigment, okay, so there are 3 pigments that will contribute to skin color. Probably the most important one is going to be melanin, and we've already talked about melanin, so you know a little bit about this really important pigment. You know about its function, protection, right? Okay, so recall that really important function here of melanin, that it does serve a very specific role in protection, and hopefully you will go back and review that story. Okay, but also melanin, because it is a pigment, it is going to contribute to skin color. Let's see. Hold on a second. All right. Yeah, so, sorry, I got distracted. So melanin, you recall, is made by melanocytes. And you remember that story. And this is just sort of, a reminder of that story. Now, relate something here. Okay, this is where we get into skin color, okay, and melanin. Now, when you have sun exposure, now remember that the function of melanin, the function, okay, don't get confused. The function of melanin is not to provide skin color. That is not the function of melanin. The function of melanin, okay, is that it will shield the DNA of keratinocytes, protecting that DNA from being damaged by sunlight. That is the function of this pigment, okay? So then it comes to follow that if you increase the amount of sun exposure you have, this is going to stimulate an increase in the production of melanin. All right. So this is how a suntan happens. Okay. Melanin gives a dark color. Well, it can give like a reddish color to brownish to black color, okay, to the skin. So the more sun exposure you have, the more melanin you're going to produce. Therefore, the darker the skin will be. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, a real important concept here, okay, in terms of skin color, and not talking about suntan, all right, but what our skin color is in terms of ethnicity. All humans have the same number of melanocytes. Okay, we all have the relative same number of melanocytes. But what makes the difference in skin color is the amount of melanin that is made by those melanocytes. Okay, so a lighter skinned person is not going to make as much melanin. A darker skinned person makes more melanin. Okay, so remember, it is not about the number of melanocytes a person has. We all have the same relative number of these cells. It's just related to the level of activity of these cells in terms of how much do these cells make. All right. Now, relate that to something. Okay, think of, let's say, a person who's very fair-skinned or light-skinned. This means they do not make very much melanin. Okay. So do you think when this person goes out into the sunlight that they're going to have very much protection of their keratinocytes? They're not, right? Because they don't make very much melanin. So this is why it's much easier for a person who is lighter skinned to get a sunburn, right? That's why it's important for, people at the lighter skin you have, the more you should be wearing sunscreen to protect your skin, all right? Because otherwise, you don't have enough melanin to protect your keratinocytes. So what will happen is the DNA in those keratinocytes is going to be destroyed. And once the DNA is destroyed, the cell undergoes apoptosis. It will kill itself before it's ready, all right? So this is why you get burnt, okay? Why you have burn. You are literally destroying your keratinocytes. You're killing them. All right, so you're revealing the deeper layers of the skin. So that's what, and then, if you get a severe sunburn, what happens? You get blisters, right? You get a, the separation between the epidermis and the dermis, because you've really gone deep. You've gone down and burnt down like, downside spinosum. All right, so, that's something to keep in mind there, right? Now, what if you are a person with darker skin? This means you make more melanin and make a relationship there. This means if you make more melanin and you go out into the sun, are you going to have more or less protection against that UV damage? You're going to have a lot more protection, all right? So again, relate that, okay? Now, what about freckles and moles? Freckles and moles are simply accumulations of melanin, all right? That's all that is. Now, over time, for example, a person who spends a lot of time in the sun throughout their whole life, they're going to develop more freckles and more moles than a person who does not, okay? Because again, what triggers an increase in the production of melanin? Sunlight. And so this can, over time, result in a greater occurrence or appearance of these freckles and moles. All right, freckles are like flat, moles are elevated. So moles have more, it's like a larger accumulation of melanin. Skin color. Remember, melanin is really the most significant factor to determine skin color. And, again, melanin is produced by melanocytes, and that melanin will accumulate in keratinocytes, right? We have our melanocytes, I'll say it again, are going to make melanin. They're going to exotize melanin in a vesicle called a melanosome. The melanosome is then endocytosed by keratinocytes, and that melanin then inside of that keratinocyte covers the nucleus, to protect that DNA from being damaged in there, right? And again, exposure to UV light is going to stimulate an increase in melanin secretion, and that will result in a darkening of skin. All right, again, we all pretty much have the same number of melanocytes. So in darker skinned people, there's a little more to the melanin here, all right? Not only do darker skinned people make more melanin, okay, they make greater quantities of melanin, but also the melanin breaks down more slowly. So, melanin is going to eventually break down and be resynthesized, like, most pigments and proteins and pretty much everything that we're made of, right? It gets old and it gets broken down. It's not useful anymore. So we make more. Well, in darker skinned people, the breakdown of that melanin is much more slow. All right, so it's there. It's going to be around longer. Also, the melanin granules inside of the keratinocytes are more spread out. All right, so they're more spread out in the cells. And also in darker skinned people, you see keratinocytes that have melanin in them in more areas of the epidermis. Okay, it's seen all throughout the epidermis, right? In lighter skinned people, again, there's little melanin made to begin with, and the melanin that is, because there's such little melanin, you have to have that melanin restricted to like the most important part of the epidermis, which would be the stratum basale, because that's where our stem cells are. So here's a histological comparison, okay, of darker skin versus lighter skin. And it's really obvious the difference here. Okay, so look at all these little, on the left here, look at all of the melanocytes. Okay, the melanocytes are the brown looking cells. And notice that these melanocytes, they're darker, okay, and they're also spread out more in the epidermis, okay? And if you look at lighter skin, you don't see that. In fact, it's this particular slide, you don't really see any melanocytes. You would be able to if you had a higher magnification. And if you did, you would mainly see that the melanocytes are going to be predominantly located in the stratum basale. There are a couple of other pigments that contribute to skin color besides melanin. The second one is carotene. So carotene is going to give like a yellow to orange pigment. And, this is going to be pretty much restricted to the palms and soles is where you find this. And this one also can be converted to vitamin A for vision. And vitamin A does play a role in epidermal health. Vitamin A plays a role in dermal health as well. Hemoglobin is the third skin color pigment. Hemoglobin you've heard of and you know of a little bit, all right? You do know it's associated with red blood cells. So hemoglobin is the pigment that you find there in red blood cells. And what this pigment does is it, basically oxygen is going to bind to hemoglobin. All right, hemoglobin is, it's a pigment, but more importantly, it's a transport mechanism for oxygen. Okay, so oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin. Now, the more oxygen that is bound to hemoglobin, the more red or the more pink the skin will appear. Okay, so yeah, it provides a reddish to pink hue. Caucasians have more transparent skin, so you can see the hemoglobin a little bit more. All right, this pink or red hue can be seen a little bit more in Caucasians. Okay, excessive sun exposure. So really this is an important topic here because, you want to appreciate the sun. You really do. The sun is so good for you. It's good for you psychologically. It makes you feel great. In fact, it has been, I'm sort of going on a tangent, so I'm going to try not to, but, it has been shown that, so there's a a psychological condition known as SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Maybe if you've taken psychology, you've learned about it. Seasonal affective disorder basically involves a type of depression that is associated with lack of sun exposure. All right. So it has been recorded consistently that people who live in the northern areas of this country, for example, so where it's colder and people maybe don't get outside so much, and the days are shorter, so you don't have as much sunlight, that the incidence of seasonal affective disorder is much higher in those areas compared to like the southern areas like Florida and Louisiana and Mississippi and all that, right? Seasonal affective disorder is at a much lower incidence in areas where where people spend more time outside, okay, like Florida, for example, right? So there is definitely a link between sun exposure and psychology, all right? So that's one issue. That's one thing, why sunlight is good for you. Sunlight's also good for you because, hey, vitamin D synthesis. You need UV light to stimulate the process involved in vitamin D synthesis. But we've got to keep in mind, and just with anything that's great in life, anything that you love or like or whatever, anything that's fun, all right, really needs to be in moderation, right? I mean, it's all good, everything's great as long as it's in moderation. That's the key point, okay, with so many things, right? And that's definitely the case here with sunlight, all right? It really, moderation is best, okay? If you have excessive sun exposure, then you're really setting yourself up for some trouble, all right? And this not only includes natural sunlight, this also includes tanning beds, all right? For people who go to tanning beds because they feel like they will look better if they have tan skin, right? So they want to go to tanning beds. Well, keep in mind the tanning beds are just as damaging, if not more damaging, than natural sunlight. Probably more damaging, right? So, again, excessive sun exposure is a bad thing, very bad. What's going to happen? The elastic fibers in your dermis are going to be damaged, okay? The elastic fibers will clump. And you've all seen people like this. I know I have, where, someone is maybe in their, I don't know, I mean, maybe middle age to 60 or so, and they've spent too much time in the sun or in tanning beds. And as you age, all right, this really shows up. The fact that these elastic fibers get clumped up, it makes the skin look like leather. You've seen this before, all right? So basically it looks like leather because you have lost the elasticity of the skin. Now, when you lose the elasticity of the skin, not only will the skin appear leathery, but person will also look much older than they actually are. Okay, again, because they're going to lose this flexibility and elasticity in the face. All right. What else is bad about excessive sun exposure? Well, there's something called folic acid. Folic acid is something that is required for DNA synthesis. All right. So in order for us to synthesize DNA, we absolutely need this folic acid. And UV light destroys folic acid, right? UV light not only destroys DNA itself, but it also destroys the precursor that is required to make DNA. Okay, so again, too much UV light is really bad for the DNA. And when you destroy DNA, what's going to happen is that the cell is going to kill itself. Because if the DNA is no good, there's no point for the cell to exist. There is no purpose for that cell any longer, and the cell will go through apoptosis and kill itself. So you get a loss of cells, all right? So yeah, now this is also very important for pregnancy, right? Because when you have a developing human, okay, in your body, you really need a lot of this folic acid, which is why during pregnancy, you're usually placed on a folic acid supplement to make sure you're getting enough of this, because you need a lot of extra folic acid to really make sure that you're doing enough DNA synthesis, not only in your own body, but in the developing body as well. All right, so this is why if you're pregnant, you really definitely don't want to have excessive sun exposure. It will have an effect on the development of that embryo or fetus. Photosensitivity, this is something actually that is associated with drugs. All right, a lot of different drugs, many classes of drugs, antibiotics, antihistamines, many of them. A side effect is photosensitivity. Now, photosensitivity just means some part of the body is overly sensitive to the sun. A lot of times this happens in the eyes. All right, the eyes will be especially sensitive to sun. And if that's the case, just put some sunglasses on. You'll be all right. But, you can have photosensitivity in the skin, which will lead to rashes. So just, if you're taking certain drugs where a side effect is photosensitivity, then you want to be careful, to make sure that you're definitely wearing some extra sunscreen out there and have your sunglasses on. All right, now this slide, very important slide. You will definitely have a question on this. And, this, for those of you going into the clinical field, which most of you are, you'll need to know this forever, all right? This is just something you got to know forever. Now, alterations in skin color can indicate disease, all right? Now, this goes back to the idea of the inspection, right? So when you're doing a physical exam, the first part of a physical exam is inspection. You first look at that person from head to toe and try to note any kind of alterations that there might be in skin color. Because here's the deal, okay? If you're looking at a person from the outside, all right, and they're telling you, I have these symptoms and those symptoms, and I feel this way and that way. Well, if you haven't done any scans yet, if you haven't done any blood tests or urinalysis or any kind of test about what's going on the inside of the body, well, you don't know what's going on the inside of the body. You don't know until you get in there and find out, right? So in the beginning, before you've done all that, the first most important thing is inspection. And so part of the inspection includes looking at alterations in skin color, because these alterations can give you some sort of a clue as to what might be going on the inside of the body, all right? So real important. So the first alteration in skin color is cyanosis. Cyanosis is when you get a bluish color to the skin, all right? Now, you should definitely know the causes of these, all right? Again, your questions on this will involve not only knowing what this color is, but what a cause or a general cause is. So a bluish tint to the skin. Now, usually where you're going to see this in a person would be at the tips of the fingers, all right? That's one of the most common places that you would see this. Another secondarily common place that you would see this would be around the lips. Okay, so these are areas where you'd want to look for cyanosis. Now, what is it caused by? It's caused by low oxygenation of hemoglobin. So what this means is that this individual's hemoglobin is not carrying enough oxygen. Okay, think about that. Now, hemoglobin gives a red tint, correct? Okay, so if it's not carrying enough oxygen, hemoglobin is not activated. So the red pigment is not activated. So instead, there will be a bluish tint, okay, to the skin. And now, again, you're most likely to find this in the digits, right? So the fingertips, and I forgot to mention the toes. Yes, the toes, definitely fingertips and toes. And the reason you're more likely to find cyanosis in those areas is because those are the far extremities. All right, so So it's going to be more difficult for hemoglobin to be oxygenated in those areas that are farthest away from, the rest of the body, basically. All right. So yeah, that's the cause. Now you would see cyanosis in things like there are a lot of different lung diseases that are going to be associated with cyanosis, and you'll learn about those lung diseases next semester. But things like emphysema, all right, certain chronic pulmonary disorders, you may see this cyanosis, all right. And again, if they have a lung problem, then they're probably, or they may not be exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide very well at the level of the lung. So there's just low oxygen anyway. And so the hemoglobin, well, there's not going to be enough oxygen capable of being attached to hemoglobin. You can also see this in certain heart conditions, especially congenital heart conditions. So babies, all right, babies and children, okay, a big indication of a possibility of a heart condition in a baby or a young child would be the appearance of cyanosis. This means that the blood going to and from the heart and lungs is not happening correctly. It's usually an indication that there's a problem in the hearts, okay? All right, so that's cyanosis. Erythema is the opposite. It's a redness. Erythema is going to be resulting from an increase in blood flow to a certain area. So typically you're going to see this in fever, all right? Hypertension, okay, so high blood pressure. Of course, if you have high blood pressure, you're going to be able to see a redness to the skin, all right? Inflammation, we've already talked about why you see redness and inflammation, right? Why do you see redness and inflammation? Because your blood vessels are dilated around the site of injury or infection. And so you're having an increase in blood flow there. Allergies can cause redness. Pallor is a pale or a white color, blanching. And so this, of course, would be due to a decrease in blood flow to a certain area. And so causes of that can be anemia. All right, so anemia, there are different causes to anemia, which you'll learn about next semester. Anemia, we're dealing with, it may or may not be a problem with hemoglobin, okay? But most of the time, it's a problem in the production of red blood cells, which could be associated with a variety of things. It could be a bone marrow issue, it could be an iron deficiency issue, variety of different causes to anemia. But in any case, with anemia, you will see a paling or a blanching pale color of the skin. And like I said, low blood pressure, all right? Fear and anger, especially fear. So this is an interesting one. So think about this. Why would you have a paling or blanching of the skin when you're afraid? It's like someone says, "You look like you just saw a ghost." That really pale, right? So when we have a fear response, okay, what happens is all the blood from the skin is diverted to where? Our vital organs. Because when you have a fear response, you're getting ready to do something. You're getting ready to either fight or you're getting ready to flee, run away. Your body is physiologically preparing for one of those two options. So what we need to do if we're going to fight or we're going to flee, we need to get all that blood to our vital organs. We need to rush all that blood to the heart, to the lungs, okay, to help mobilize us for that result. Okay, so yeah. All right, jaundice. Jaundice is a yellowing color. So jaundice, typically you want to look for this, if you look at the face, you can possibly see some yellowing of the face, but especially the eyes. You can really see it in the white of the eyes if someone has jaundice. Okay, so definitely dead giveaway if you see yellowing in the eyes, always we're dealing with jaundice. And so, jaundice, we were not going to get too much into it. Again, that's something for next semester. but there's something called bilirubin, which is associated with the breakdown of lipid, okay, by the liver. All right. So what happens is you get an accumulation of this bilirubin, and bilirubin has a yellow tint to it. Okay. So you'll see this. So the idea is, if someone has jaundice, right away you want to think liver, liver, liver. All right. There's got to be a liver problem here. All right. Now, it could be the liver itself, or it could be, one of these products associated with the liver, right? Bilirubin is made by the liver, okay? So it could be that we're having too much bilirubin made. It could be that bilirubin is not being processed correctly. It could be that bilirubin is not being excreted correctly from the body, okay? So, but in any case, when you see this yellowing, you want to think, okay, something wrong with liver, or there's something wrong with bilirubin. All right, again, bilirubin is associated with processing of lipid from the diet. Albinism. So albinism is going to be a milky white color to the skin. They may have different colored eyes, especially like a reddish eye. And this is a genetic thing. All right, so albinism is not a symptom of a disease. It is not a symptom of any condition. Albinism is genetic, all right? It is a genetic inability to make melanin, okay? So a person who has albinism is not able to make melanin, okay? So this is why they will have really white skin. They will have blonde, white, almost white hair, and they will definitely not have brown eyes, right? They're going to have like red eyes, or they may have a blue-gray color to the eye, okay? Bruises. What are bruises? Now, of course, when you're doing your inspection, you want to look for bruises. Bruises can mean all kinds of things. So, what is a bruise? It's actually a hematoma. All right. It's clotted blood beneath the skin. All right. That's all that is. Okay. So that was an important slide, as you can tell. All right. Next couple of slides. I don't want most of this is here for your interest. Okay. But I will mention a little bit about it. Okay. So the evolution of skin color in terms of genetics. So why do different ethnicities have different skin colors at birth? Okay. Why? Well, there have been multiple evolutionary selection pressures in different areas of the world. And most of this has to do with the level of exposure to UV light. Okay, so again, if you go and travel to countries of the world where it is mostly hot, where there's a lot of sunlight, so people spend a lot of time outside, you will find that in these countries, in these areas, the people living there are going to be darker skinned. If you go to countries or places that are colder, or there's not much sunlight, and maybe people aren't outside, if they are outside, they're covered up because it's cold, right? You will find that people living in these regions of the world have lighter skin. Okay, so again, it really all comes back to this sun, to the sunlight. Okay, so over millions of years, okay, this is the evolutionary theory for skin color, all right, is that there was a selection pressure, okay, there was a demand for humans to adapt to their environment, okay, and so that's why some people make a lot of melanin to protect them from that UV light, and some people don't make a lot of melanin because they weren't exposing or being exposed to that much UV light. Okay, and of course, the evolution of skin color relates to other things, which we'll mention on this next slide, I believe. Okay, and again, I already talked about harmful effects of UV light. One thing I didn't mention was cancer, skin cancer. We're going to focus on that at the end of this PowerPoint in lecture video 3. And then, of course, I mentioned some other, adverse effects of having too much sun. And then, of course, what is our benefit as long as it's in moderate levels vitamin D synthesis. We really need sunlight for this. Okay, you have to have some amount of sunlight if you want to make vitamin D, period. All right. And then, of course, psychologically, I consider sunlight to be a psychological benefit too, and we do have evidence of that. Like I said, like with seasonal affective disorder, for example. Okay. And again, like I mentioned, populations that have evolved or have always lived in tropical areas, they're going to have darker skin because they've been exposed to more UV light. Okay, and again, here's a little more about this. It's really like what I've already said about this, the evolution of skin color, if you want to read into that. And again, why we need vitamin D? We need it for calcium. So this is really important for you to understand and keep in mind because we'll bring it up again when we talk about bone physiology. All right, vitamin D, why do we need vitamin D? Because we need vitamin D in the intestines, okay, to absorb calcium. Right? You can't absorb calcium unless vitamin D is present, and you need calcium for lots of things, right? We need calcium for, pregnancy, okay, lactation, all right? Now, again, you can read through these. I'm probably not going to ask a specific question, okay, but here are some other factors, okay, that can or that have or do play a role in different skin color. And a lot of this is pretty obvious. All right, it's pretty obvious. All right, so skin markings, just a note about this. This is just definition level on this. Don't get too detailed with it. So we have something called friction ridges. You should simply know that these friction ridges are what we call fingerprints. All right, so the anatomical term for fingerprints is friction ridges. They're called friction ridges because we have them to help with our gripping ability. Okay, all right, so that we can have friction between our fingertips and whatever it is that we're picking up. If we had just a smooth surface there would not be friction, and anytime you try to pick something up, it would just fall right out of your hands. All right, so that's basically why we have these friction ridges, and they're different in everybody. You know that everyone, even identical twins, have different friction ridges. Flexion lines are different. Flexion lines are seen basically at the joints, seen in your fingers, your palms, okay? So like when you, or in your wrist. So like when you bend your wrist back and forth, right? And you'll notice you have like these lines that are formed from doing that over and over again. This is just based on experience in life, all right? Flexion lines just form over time, like between joints, basically. So that's all that is. Freckles and moles, I already mentioned. These are accumulations of melanocytes. Okay, these melanocytes will increase production of melanin as well. Okay, you must understand that these melanocytes that congregate in a certain area are going to be increasing their production of melanin, and that's why you get this darker color there in that one area. And again, why? How are these caused? Okay, for most, now a lot of us are born with freckles, right? Okay, that's just an accumulation of, genetically, also genetically programmed, okay? But for a lot of people, freckles and especially moles are going to be the result over time of increased UV exposure, all right? So freckles, again, are like flat. Moles are also called nevi, and these are going to be elevated. Now, moles you do want to look at, okay? So this can be part of your physical inspection as well. If you see moles on someone, take a quick glance at them and look at how dark are they? How big are they? And what is the contour? How are they shaped? And the reason you want to look at the moles in that kind of way is because it can be indicative of cancer. All right, so we'll talk about cancer at the end of this PowerPoint. All right, so we'll bring that up. Hemangiomas. Whenever you see the word hema, that means blood. Okay. Angioma is like a, well, anytime you see the word oma, it means tumor. But tumors aren't always bad. You can have benign tumors, and they don't cause any problems, all right? So basically, this is, if you break the word down, oh, an angio means blood vessel. Okay, so you can break this word down, okay, as meaning like a tumor of a blood vessel, or as we say here, capillaries. Okay, so, but these are not harmful, all right? Hemangiomas, well, let me restate that. A lot of hemangiomas can be very dangerous, okay, and be indicative of some very serious disease. But there are some kinds of hemangiomas, such as birthmarks, which birthmarks are a type of hemangioma that are not harmful. Okay, these are benign. All right, and what you'll see is that this little area of discoloration has like sort of a reddish color. All right, it may be like a light brown to reddish color. And you know, again, if it's a birthmark, it's usually, you know, not harmful. And some will just go away, others will stay there, but they really don't mean anything outside of that. All right, I'm wondering if I should stop this video soon. What are we on, 39? Let me get through a few more slides. All right, so we're now going to talk about functions of the skin. All right, and these are the functions. We're going to go through each one. The first function, as you know, is protection. And remember that we can detail out that role of protection very specifically. All right. We can talk about melanin, right? We can talk about the stratum granulosum. Okay. We can talk about the fact that there are Langerhans cells there to protect So anyway, we're going to say a little more about this protective role, and we're going to talk about all these. So let's try and get through a couple of these functions. So first of all, as a protective role, okay, the integumentary system, sorry, you know, of course, is exposed to a lot of things, right, outside the body. And we can actually say that the skin constitutes three kinds of barriers. The skin serves as a chemical barrier, it serves as a physical barrier, and it serves as a biological barrier. And so we will mention examples of each way in which these are true. So as a chemical barrier, all right, there are a couple of ways that the skin is going to serve as a chemical barrier. And you already know one that's involved, melanin, right? Melanin is a chemical pigment, and melanin does help protect us in a way that you already know of, all right? So the skin serves as a chemical barrier. Now, I'm going to mention, I know I'm going backwards on this slide here, the acid mantle. So this is interesting, all right? You know that the blood has a pH of 7.4, and we have to keep it like that. That's normal. Well, it's really interesting because the skin, all right, so the epidermis, we're talking about epidermis here, has a low pH. It's acidic, and that's really interesting. Like, why is the skin acidic? Well, the reason for this is that all the bacteria that like to get into human beings, the reason those bacteria like to get into human beings is because they want to get into that 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. They want to get into that 7.4 pH. They thrive in that under those particular conditions. Okay. So the skin actually has its own little protective mechanism, and that is the fact that the epidermis has a low pH. All right, so we're able to help prevent the initial entry of some bacteria into the body just by this low pH. All right, so that's a pretty cool thing. All right, what else about chemicals? So the skin does secrete a variety of chemicals. One of them is sweat. Okay, sweat contains antimicrobial proteins. Now, sebum, I don't want to get y'all confused. Sebum is something that is secreted from sebaceous glands. All right, sebum has a lot of different chemicals in it, and we'll mention them later on. So sebum comes from sebaceous glands. And I know this is really confusing. Sebum is actually not sweat. I should not have bulleted it this way. All right. Sebum is like an oily, viscous secretion, not like sweat. Sweat is different. Okay, sebum, anyway, we're going to mention more about it later. Okay, but for now, just keep in mind that this particular chemical or fluid called sebum contains antimicrobial proteins. All right. One of these antimicrobial proteins is called defensin. Defensin is as a protein that we make by ourselves that kills bacteria. Okay, so sebaceous glands will secrete this defensin. All right, and so this is an important point here about another way that the skin serves as a chemical barrier. And now, kind of think to yourself, because I'm about to say something kind of controversial here. You know, of course, with all this COVID stuff and all this hand sanitizer we're using, you know, we're using it with good intentions. You know, that we kill this virus that gets on you, right? Well, outside of that, I want you to think about this, all right? The body has its own natural self-defense mechanisms, all right? And it's not always the greatest idea to overload ourselves on all of these external synthetic chemicals that we buy in the stores, all right? Keep in mind that your body has its own ways of protecting itself. So when you use too much hand sanitizer, what are you doing? You're destroying actually a lot of natural flora or natural bacteria that exist on your skin that help prevent other bacteria from coming in. All right. You know, and you know, you got to be careful with skin products so that they don't disrupt this. All right. So that they don't, you know, change this pH of the skin, so that they don't kill or render ineffective these natural chemicals that we already make that help, you know, defend us from certain microbes. All right. I'm not saying you shouldn't use hand sanitizer. All right. Um, you know, because it's like, you know, we all kind of have to right now, I guess. Again, that's controversial. That's a personal opinion. But, you know, my opinion is overuse of these things destroys your natural ability to protect yourself. All right. So the second barrier that we're going to have there in the skin that serves a protective role, right, is just the fact that the skin is a physical barrier. And this really has to do with, well, our most superficial layers of the skin, stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, okay? These serve mechanical barrier, okay, so a physical barrier, all right? Now, what I want to mention here is, okay, it says here, surrounded by glycolipids. Okay, really what's being discussed here is the stratum granulosum, even though granulosum isn't mentioned right here. Okay, glycolipids we're going to find in the stratum granulosum. And remember that really this lipid is the important part, all right? And so that's going to help keep things out, right? Remember that some chemicals have limited entry to the skin. The only things that we can really get in for the most part are going to be lipid-soluble substances, right? Only lipid-soluble substances, for the most part, are going to be able to get in naturally because they're able to cross that stratum granulosum, which has all these glycolipids, okay? But you're not be able to get water, okay, pass. Now, here's a list of other substances that do have limited entry into the skin, but I'm not going to ask you about any of them, all right? These are just here for your interest. You will not have a question about any of these. Just know the first point here, that lipid-soluble substances, yes, they are able to get in because they can pass the stratum granulosum. All right, the third type of barrier, as far as protective, all right, function of the skin is the biological barrier. Most of this really has to do with the immune system. So yes, we have a very large representation of our immune system in the skin. Remember that the epidermis contains Langerhans cells, okay, which are also called dendritic cells. These Langerhans cells, remember, they're going to do phagocytosis. Okay, so right away, if something does get in, if you have some sort of pathogen that does get into the epidermis, we have our Langerhans cells there. They're going to phagocytose those, the bacteria or whatever, and take it inside itself. And then those cells, the Langerhans cells, are going to present that foreign antigen or foreign pathogen to a white blood cell. All right. And that will then activate a full-blown immune response against the pathogen. Okay, so you have all this in the epidermis. Dermis also contains macrophages. All right, and remember that in the dermis, we're going to have these macrophages also be able to activate the immune system by presenting pathogens to white blood cells. All right. So that's how the body, or I'm sorry, the skin serves a protective role. Remember the details there on exactly how and why the skin serves a protective role. Now, next major function of the skin is body temperature regulation. All right, body temperature regulation, and you already know pretty much about this. So this is just a reminder here. All right, that remember that when body temperature increases, the vessels of the dermis, okay, are going to dilate. All right, that is going to have two effects. One effect is that we're going to have the release of heat from the skin just by way of having all that blood close to the surface of the skin. And it's also going to increase sweat gland activity just by way of the fact that dilated blood vessels will because they're larger, they're going to place pressure on surrounding sweat gland activities. I'm sorry, they're going to I'm losing my words. The dilated vessels are going to place pressure on those sweat glands, right? And that's going to cause the sweat glands to just by mechanics to cause it to secrete. But remember, we also do have our hypothalamus up in the brain that is also signaling these sweat glands to secrete, okay? And if it's cold, all right, our blood vessels will constrict, right? So that we can slow heat loss and also so that we can divert that blood to the vital organs to keep those warm. Sensation, okay, next major function of the skin is sensation. All right, we have our cutaneous sensory receptors, and there are a wide variety of them. Now, we have receptors called, this is just sort of a general term here. Exteroreceptor is a general term. And all this means is that these are receptors that are sensitive to sensations coming in from outside the body. All right. So they're made sensitive to temperature, touch, pain, of course, and temperature. So remember I mentioned free nerve endings, and again, they're called free nerve endings because the ending of that neuron is free. It does not have a specific structure. So it's capable of picking up a wide variety of sensations, but you should know it's really good at picking up pain. And as a reminder, we have our Meissner's corpuscle that is located superficially in the dermis. Therefore, it's responsible for superficial touch. And then we have our Pacinian corpuscle, which is located in the deeper reticular part of the dermis. Therefore, it's responsible for deeper touch. Okay, again, here is a reminder, just another reminder of our model here of the skin and how we are actually going through all of these things. Okay, again, look at all the stuff here in your dermis. All right, and we still have yet to talk about some of those. What about metabolic functions of the skin? And really that has to do with vitamin D, big time, all right? Remember why we need vitamin D? We need it for calcium absorption. Okay, so if you're not getting vitamin D, you're not getting calcium. Okay, you're not able to absorb it. All right. Okay, another major idea here on this slide is collagenase. So this is really intriguing. All right, collagenase, ACE, that's an enzyme, right? So this means this is an enzyme that breaks down collagen. Collagenase, really important one. Now you might be wondering, why would you want to break down collagen? Well, again, collagen, like anything else, like not anything else, but most proteins and fibers and structures, cells, they get old, okay? They do their function, they work for a while, and then they get old. So they have to be broken down, and then we make new stuff, okay? Now, that's not true of everything, all right? There are definitely examples where that is not the case, okay? And, you'll see that throughout the course. But collagen, anyway, is an example of something that breaks down, all right? Collagenase is the enzyme that breaks that collagen down. And so when it gets broken down by collagenase, then, neighboring fibroblasts will go ahead and make new collagen and lie out new collagen fibers. Well, here's the deal. Okay. It's really intriguing. So collagenase, because it breaks down old collagen, it is associated with a lack of wrinkles. All right. So with aging, we get wrinkles, right? Part of the reason we get these wrinkles is because we don't have as much collagenase. So we're not able to break down old collagen that is no longer functional. We're not able to break it down anymore. So what ends up happening is that these collagen fibers just lay themselves out in a parallel fashion, causing lines to appear. Okay, so basically, as you age, you're going to have a couple of things happening with collagen in the dermis. Okay, one thing is that you're going to have a decrease in the amount of collagenase. So you're not going to be able to break down or destroy that old collagen that's no longer useful. All right, so what happens to that old collagen? It just stays there. Those collagen fibers just stay there. And they're useless, okay? And so they're just going to exist in a parallel fashion and form this line, this like a line appearance, all right, on the face, on the skin. Now, another thing about aging that happens really is that over a lifetime of making facial expressions, okay? Remember I said that that earlier, when you make facial expressions, skeletal muscle pulls on the dermis. It's pulling on the collagen. So over a lifetime of making the same facial expressions, those collagen fibers end up staying in that same spot, all right? They're no longer as resilient. Again, they're not resilient anymore. We don't have collagenase to break those old collagen fibers down. They're old. They don't function well. These old collagen fibers no longer have the quality of giving strength. They no longer have the quality of giving like a resiliency. So you're having these collagen fibers laid out just like your facial expressions. That's why we get like the crow's feet, all right, at the corner of the eyes from squinting and laughing. That's why we get the frown or smile lines around the corners of the mouth, right? This is because the collagen fibers just stay that way because we don't have as much collagenase anymore to break down those old collagen fibers to make new ones. If we had the same amount of collagenase for the rest of our lives, we would never get wrinkles. All right. This is another reason why for skin products, you really want to look for things that have collagen in it, because if it has collagen in it, you can bring new collagen to the area, all right? And it can help prevent the appearance of further wrinkles, all right? It's not going to take away the wrinkles that are already there, but it can help prevent the appearance of wrinkles in the future, basically. Okay, so collagen is a beautiful thing. All right, but yeah, real interesting thing about collagenase. What's next? Blood reservoir. So one of the functions of the skin is that it actually serves as a storage place for blood. All right, because we do have plenty of vascularity in our dermis and in the hypodermis. All right, so we do store some blood there. And excretion is our another major function, and we mentioned that in chapter 1. Remember that the urinary system is not the only place that does excretion. The skin does it too. All right. So we secrete waste through the skin, and then we do sweating, which will help us excrete salt and water when needed. All right, that is definitely a good place to stop. I know that was a lot of information. There's just a lot going on with this particular system. All right, so that's enough for now. I will be posting the third and final video on this, which is mainly going to deal with pathology. So we'll talk about cancer, skin cancer, and some other stuff. All right, so all right, have fun with all that, and I hope you have a great day.